When my daughter-in-law laughed at my morning stretches and called them pathetic old lady moves, she had no idea she was mocking the very routine that built my $34 million fitness empire. That same evening, as she criticized my embarrassing workouts in front of the entire family, I made a decision that would change all of their lives forever. I decided it was time to exercise my right to disinherit them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Chen, and at 67 years old, I've learned that the most dangerous thing you can do is underestimate someone based on appearances. For the past 5 years since my husband Robert passed away, I have been living what everyone assumed was a quiet, simple life in our modest ranch house in Cedar Falls. Every morning at 6 sharp, I'd roll out my purple yoga mat in the backyard and begin my routine. Gentle stretches, modified poses, breathing exercises. Nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention from the neighbors. To anyone watching, I probably looked like exactly what I appeared to be: a widowed grandmother trying to stay flexible enough to keep up with her grandchildren. The truth, as it often is, was far more complicated than that. My daughter-in-law Vanessa had moved into our house 6 months ago with my son Michael and their 2 teenage children. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary while they looked for a new place after Michael lost his job at the accounting firm. But as weeks turned into months, I began to notice that Vanessa's attitude toward me had shifted from grateful to condescending. It started with small comments. "Mom, Chen, maybe you should be more careful with those stretches at your age." Or, there are senior exercise programs at the community center that might be more appropriate. Each suggestion came wrapped in concern, but underneath I could hear the judgment. The assumption that because I was older, because I moved deliberately rather than dramatically, my approach to fitness was somehow inadequate. The morning everything changed started like any other. I was in my backyard moving through my familiar sequence of stretches and gentle strength exercises when I heard voices from the kitchen window. Vanessa was on the phone with someone, and her voice carried clearly across the yard. "You should see Margaret's little exercise routine," she was saying, her tone dripping with amusement. "She gets out there every morning with this ancient yoga mat and does these tiny little movements. It's honestly kind of sad, like watching someone pretend to exercise." I continued my routine, not missing a beat, but I felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't the first time I'd overheard Vanessa discussing me with her friends, but it was the first time she'd been quite so openly dismissive. "I keep telling Michael we need to talk to her about joining one of those senior fitness programs," Vanessa continued. "Something more realistic for someone her age. This whole independent act is getting embarrassing." Embarrassing. The word hung in the morning air like smoke. As I moved into my next stretch, I caught my reflection in the sliding glass door. What Vanessa saw was a 67-year-old woman in comfortable workout clothes, moving slowly and carefully through basic exercises. What she didn't see was someone who had spent the last 30 years building one of the most successful fitness consulting businesses in the country. That evening, the family gathered for dinner as we did most nights since Michael and Vanessa had moved in. My other son David was there with his wife Rebecca, and my daughter Linda had stopped by with her husband James. It should have been a pleasant family evening, but I could sense tension in the air from the moment everyone sat down. "Mom," Michael said, cutting into his chicken with the kind of forced casualness that meant he'd been coached on what to say, "Vanessa and I have been talking, and we're a little worried about you." I set down my fork and looked at him. Michael had always been the more easily influenced of my children, the one who sought approval from whoever spoke loudest. "Worried about what, sweetheart?" Vanessa jumped in before he could respond. "Your exercise routine, Margaret. We think it might be time to consider something more age-appropriate. You're not 20 anymore, and some of those movements you're doing could be dangerous." Around the table, I could see my other children shifting uncomfortably. Linda was staring at her plate while David looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. This had clearly been discussed among them, probably at Vanessa's instigation. My exercise routine, I repeated slowly. And what exactly concerns you about it? Well, Vanessa said, warming to her topic now that she had an audience, it's just so basic. And frankly, it looks a bit silly, like you're playing at being a fitness instructor when you'd be better off in a chair yoga class with people your own age. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked around the table at my children, waiting for one of them to defend me, to point out that I was in excellent health, that my routine was clearly working for me. Instead, I saw a collection of uncomfortable faces, people who were allowing this woman to humiliate their mother in their presence. I see, I said quietly, and you've all agreed that my exercise routine is embarrassing. Linda finally looked up. Mom, we just want you to be safe. Maybe something more supervised would be better? Rebecca nodded in agreement. There are wonderful programs for seniors, very gentle, very appropriate. I felt a familiar sensation, one I hadn't experienced in years. It was the feeling of being completely underestimated, of having people make assumptions about my capabilities based on surface appearances. In the business world, I'd learned to use this to my advantage. But sitting at my own dinner table, being condescended to by my own family, it felt like a betrayal. You know what? I said, standing up slowly. You're absolutely right. My routine is embarrassing. Embarrassingly simple for someone with my background. Vanessa smiled triumphantly. I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this, Margaret. We just want what's best for you. I looked at each of them in turn, these people who thought they knew me so well, who had reduced me to a simple grandmother with simple needs and simple capabilities. They had no idea who I really was, or what I'd built during all those years they assumed I was just playing house.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
I'll certainly take your suggestions under consideration, I said. If you'll excuse me, I have some phone calls to make. As I walked toward my study, I heard Vanessa's voice behind me, pleased and satisfied. See? I told you she'd be reasonable once we explained it properly. Sometimes you just have to be direct with older people. I closed the study door behind me and sat down at my desk, looking at the family photo that had sat there for 15 years. Robert and I with our 3 children, all of them young and full of promise, all of them completely unaware that their mother was anything more than a supportive wife and loving mother. We'd made a conscious decision back then to keep my business life separate from family life. Robert handled the public face of our investments, while I worked behind the scenes, building an empire they never suspected existed. Perhaps it was time for that to change. The first call I made was to my lawyer, Patricia Hendricks. Patricia had been handling my affairs for 20 years, but my family had never met her. As far as they knew, our family attorney was Jim Bradley, the elderly man who'd handled Robert's modest estate and simple will. Margaret, Patricia's voice was warm when she answered. How are you holding up? I know living with family can be challenging. It's been educational, I said. Patricia, I need to discuss some changes to my estate planning. There was a pause. Patricia had handled enough family disputes to read between the lines. What kind of changes are we talking about? I told her about the dinner conversation, about the pattern of condescension I'd been experiencing, about being called embarrassing for maintaining the fitness routine that had literally built the foundation of my wealth. As I spoke, I could hear Patricia taking notes. Margaret, she said when I finished, are you sure you want to make decisions based on anger? These kinds of changes can be difficult to undo. This isn't about anger, I said, surprising myself with how calm my voice sounded. This is about clarity. For years, I've allowed my family to see me as a simple widow with simple needs. I've funded their lives, supported their dreams, and asked for nothing in return except basic respect. Tonight showed me exactly what that respect is worth. What are you thinking? I looked out my study window toward the backyard, where I'd performed my embarrassing routine that morning. Tomorrow, I would do it again. And the day after that.
but everything else was about to change. I'm thinking it's time my family learned who I really am. All of it. The business, the properties, the investments. Everything I've kept private for their comfort is about to become very public for my protection. Patricia was quiet for a moment. This could get messy, Margaret. Good, I said. I'm tired of keeping things neat and simple for people who don't appreciate the effort. After I hung up with Patricia, I made my second call to Dr. Sarah Martinez, my business partner and the current CEO of Chen Wellness Enterprises. Sarah was in her 40s, brilliant, and had been instrumental in growing the company from a small consulting firm into a national powerhouse in corporate wellness programs. Margaret! Sarah's voice was energetic, despite the late hour. How's the family sabbatical going? That's what we'd been calling my decision to step back from day-to-day operations after Robert died. I'd wanted time to grieve, time to figure out what came next. I'd planned to ease back into the business gradually, but tonight had changed those plans. The sabbatical is over, I said. I need you to clear my calendar for next week. We're going public with my ownership stake. Going public? Sarah sounded confused. Margaret, the family doesn't know about the company? They know I do some consulting work from home. They think it brings in a modest income. They have no idea about the scope of our operations. Chen Wellness Enterprises wasn't just successful, it was revolutionary. We'd developed workplace fitness programs that had been adopted by Fortune 500 companies across the country. Our holistic approach to employee wellness had reduced healthcare costs and increased productivity for our clients by margins that seemed almost impossible. We held patents on fitness equipment designed for office environments, had published research that changed industry standards, and had consulting contracts worth millions of dollars. The embarrassing exercise routine my family mocked each morning was actually a carefully designed sequence I'd developed specifically for older adults and people with limited mobility. It had been tested, refined, and was now used in senior centers and rehabilitation facilities nationwide. The gentle movements Vanessa found so amusing generated royalty payments that exceeded most people's annual salaries. How do you want to handle the announcement? Sarah asked. Carefully, I said. I want them to understand gradually, the way I've had to understand their true feelings about me gradually. Over the next hour, Sarah and I outlined a plan that would systematically reveal the scope of my business interests to my family. It wasn't about cruelty, it was about education. They needed to learn that their assumptions about aging, about capability, about what constituted valuable work were not just wrong, but dangerously minded. The next morning, I was in my backyard at 6 as usual, moving through my routine with perhaps a bit more intention than normal. I could see Vanessa watching me from the kitchen window, probably planning another round of helpful suggestions about more appropriate activities for someone my age. What she couldn't see was that every movement I made was worth money. The gentle shoulder rolls that looked so basic were part of a sequence that helped prevent repetitive stress injuries in office workers. The modified warrior pose that appeared simple was actually a sophisticated balance exercise that had been proven to reduce fall risks in older adults. The breathing technique that seemed like mere relaxation was a stress reduction method that several major corporations paid us handsomely to teach their executives. Mom, could we talk for a minute? I rolled up my mat and followed him inside, where I found Vanessa waiting with what looked like a collection of brochures. We've been researching senior fitness programs, Vanessa announced proudly, and we found some wonderful options that would be perfect for you. She spread the brochures across the kitchen table like she was presenting treasure. Look at this one, chair yoga for seniors. And this one has water aerobics, which would be so much easier on your joints. I picked up one of the brochures and studied it. The program looked professionally designed, though basic, the kind of thing that would be helpful for someone just beginning their fitness journey or recovering from illness. These look very thorough, I said. Right? Vanessa beamed. Much more appropriate than whatever it is you're doing out there. I mean, no offense, but you're clearly just making it up as you go along. Making it up as I go along. If only she knew that what I was making up had generated enough revenue to buy and sell her entire lifestyle several times over. I appreciate the research, I said, but I'm quite satisfied with my current routine. Vanessa's smile faltered. Margaret, we've talked about this. You need to be realistic about your limitations. My limitations. I set down the brochure and looked at her directly. And what exactly do you perceive those to be? Well, your age, obviously, your lack of formal training, the fact that you're just kind of winging it out there. Michael shifted uncomfortably. Mom, Vanessa is just trying to help. Maybe it would be good to try something new. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, educated, and supported, and felt a profound sadness. When had he become someone who was so easily convinced that his mother was inadequate? You know what? I said. You're absolutely right. I should try something new. Before either of them could respond, my phone rang. The display showed a number I recognized immediately. Excuse me, I said, answering the call. Margaret Chen speaking? Mrs. Chen, this is Janet Williams from Global Health Solutions. I hope I'm not calling too early. Janet Williams was the CEO of one of our biggest clients, a company that employed over 50,000 people across 12 states. I'd been expecting her call about renewing their contract for the upcoming year. Not at all, Janet. What can I do for you? I wanted to personally thank you for the incredible results we've seen from your wellness program. Our employee satisfaction scores are up 18%, healthcare costs are down 12%, and productivity metrics are through the roof. The board has approved a 20% increase in our contract for next year. I was aware of Vanessa and Michael listening to every word, their expressions growing more confused by the moment. Who was that? She asked. A client, I said simply. A client for what? I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down at the table. I run a corporate wellness consulting firm. We design fitness and health programs for large companies. Michael frowned. I thought you just did some bookkeeping from home. No, sweetheart. I design, implement, and oversee comprehensive wellness programs for Fortune 500 companies. The exercises you find so embarrassing, they're part of a system I developed that's used by thousands of people every day. Vanessa laughed, but it sounded forced. Come on, Margaret. You can't be serious. Deadly serious. Would you like to see some of our marketing materials? I walked to my study and returned with a folder containing glossy brochures and case studies.
Chen Wellness Enterprises was prominently featured on every page, along with my professional photo and bio describing my 30 years of experience in corporate health consulting. Vanessa picked up one of the brochures with shaking hands. This can't be real. It's very real. We have contracts with companies in 43 states. Our program has been featured in Harvard Business Review, Fortune magazine, and the Wall Street Journal. Michael was reading over Vanessa's shoulder, his face growing paler by the moment. Mom, why didn't you ever tell us about this? Because your father and I felt it was important to keep business and family separate. He handled our personal investments while I focused on growing the company. After he died, I took a step back to grieve, but the business continued to operate. How big is this company? Vanessa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Large enough that those pathetic old lady moves you mocked yesterday generated more revenue than most people make in a year. The silence that followed was profound. I watched as the reality of their situation began to sink in. For months, they'd been living in my house, eating my food, benefiting from my generosity, while simultaneously judging my capabilities and finding me lacking. I need some air, Vanessa said suddenly and rushed out of the kitchen. Michael remained, staring at the brochures like they contained the secrets of the universe. Mom, I don't understand. If you have this successful business, why are you living so simply? Because money isn't everything, Michael. I live simply because it makes me happy, not because I have to.
There's a difference between choosing modesty and having it imposed on you. But the house, the way we live, the house is paid for and perfectly adequate for my needs. I've never been interested in flashy displays of wealth, but I am interested in being respected for who I am, not dismissed because of who you think I am. Michael set down the brochure and looked at me with new eyes. I'm sorry, Mom. I had no idea. No, you didn't. And that's partly my fault for not sharing this part of my life with you. But it's also partly your fault for assuming that because I'm older, because I'm a woman, because I move differently than you do, that I must be less capable than I appear. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at my backyard where I'd performed my routine that morning. Tomorrow I would do it again. But everything else was about to change dramatically. I've made some decisions, Michael, about the house, about our living arrangements, about my estate planning. I think it's time for some changes. What kind of changes? I turned back to face him, this son I loved but who had disappointed me so profoundly. The kind that will teach everyone in this family what respect actually means. That afternoon, while Vanessa locked herself in their bedroom and Michael sat in stunned silence in the living room, I received another call that would set the next phase of my plan in motion. Margaret, it's Patricia. I've drafted the documents we discussed. When would you like to review them? Tomorrow morning. And Patricia, I want to set up a family meeting for this weekend. It's time everyone learned the truth about their situation. Are you sure you're ready for this? I looked around my modest kitchen, thinking about all the years I'd kept my success hidden, all the times I'd allowed people to underestimate me for the sake of peace. I was tired of peace that came at the cost of truth. I've never been more ready for anything in my life. As I hung up the phone, I heard Vanessa's voice from upstairs, talking frantically to someone on her phone. She was probably calling her friends, trying to process what she'd learned, maybe even trying to figure out how to turn this new information to her advantage. She had no idea that the revelation about my business was just the beginning. The real surprises were yet to come. That evening, Linda and David came for dinner as planned, but the atmosphere was completely different from the night before. Vanessa had clearly told them about the morning's revelations because they both greeted me with a strange mixture of curiosity and nervousness. Mom, said Linda as we sat down to eat, Michael told us about your business. Why didn't you ever mention how successful it was? Because it wasn't relevant to our family relationships. Or at least I didn't think it was. David frowned. What do you mean? I mean that I assumed my value as a mother, as a member of this family, wasn't dependent on my net worth or my professional achievements. I assumed that you loved and respected me for who I am as a person. Rebecca, David's wife, shifted uncomfortably. Of course we do, Margaret. Do you? Because yesterday, when your sister-in-law was mocking my exercise routine and calling it embarrassing, none of you defended me. You all seemed quite comfortable with the idea that I needed to be managed, guided toward more appropriate activities. The table fell silent. Linda was the first to speak. Mom, we were just concerned about your safety. No, sweetheart. You were concerned about your comfort. You were embarrassed by the sight of an older woman taking up space, moving her body in ways that didn't conform to your expectations of how someone my age should behave. I looked around the table at my children and their spouses, these people I'd loved and supported and protected, sometimes from their own poor decisions. Let me ask you something.
How much do you think this house is worth? David glanced at Linda, clearly confused by the subject change. I don't know, maybe $200,000? And my monthly income? Since you've all been so concerned about my ability to support myself? Mom, Michael said quietly, we never asked about your finances. No, but you made assumptions. You assumed that because I'm a widow, because I live modestly, because I exercise gently, that I must be struggling, that I must need guidance and supervision and advice about appropriate activities for someone in my position. Vanessa finally spoke up. We were trying to help. Were you? Or were you trying to make yourselves feel better about having a family member who didn't fit your image of successful aging? I stood up, decision crystallizing in my mind with perfect clarity. I've lived in this house for 15 years and it's been a good home, but it's time for some changes. I've decided to sell it.
The reaction was immediate and explosive. Everyone started talking at once, voices overlapping in panic and confusion. "Sell the house?" Linda's voice was high with alarm. "Mom, where will you live? Where will we live?" Vanessa added, her true concerns immediately apparent. "I've purchased a new property," I said calmly. "Something more suited to my current lifestyle and needs." "What kind of property?" David asked. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. "You'll see this weekend. I'm having a little gathering to show everyone my new home and discuss some changes to my estate planning." Michael looked panicked. "Mom, you don't need to make any drastic decisions. We can work things out." "Oh, we certainly can," I agreed, "and we will. This weekend, when everyone sees exactly what they've been taking for granted." As my family sat in stunned silence, trying to process this new version of their mother and grandmother, I felt a familiar sense of satisfaction. It was the same feeling I got when a business plan came together perfectly, when all the pieces fell into place at exactly the right moment. They thought they knew me. They thought they understood my limitations, my capabilities, my worth. They were about to learn how dangerous assumptions could be, especially when those assumptions were about someone who'd spent 3 decades building an empire while they weren't paying attention. The weekend gathering was going to be very educational for everyone involved. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Documents ready for review. This is going to be quite a weekend." I typed back, "Indeed it is. Time to exercise some new rights." As I looked around the dinner table at my family, still reeling from the day's revelations, I realized that everything was about to change. The woman they thought they knew was gone forever. In her place stood someone who was no longer willing to hide her light under a bushel for their comfort. It was time for them to meet the real Margaret Chen. All of her. The next 3 days passed in a strange suspension of normalcy. Michael and Vanessa moved through the house like people walking on eggshells, whispering conversations that stopped abruptly whenever I entered a room. I continued my morning routine with renewed purpose, each movement now carrying the weight of vindication. Every gentle stretch was a reminder of the empire they dismissed. Every breathing exercise a meditation on the power of being underestimated. On Thursday morning, I was contacted by Marcus Webb from Business Weekly magazine. Marcus had been following Chen Wellness Enterprises for years, documenting our growth from a small consulting firm to a national powerhouse in corporate health solutions. "Margaret, I hope you don't mind me calling directly. I heard through industry channels that you might be stepping back into an active role with the company." I settled into my study chair, looking out at the backyard where I'd started my day with the routine my family found so amusing. Word travels fast in our industry. It does when it involves someone of your caliber. I was hoping to schedule an interview about your return to active leadership. Our readers would be fascinated to hear about your sabbatical and what brought you back. The timing was perfect, almost as if the universe was conspiring to support my plans. "I'd be happy to speak with you, Marcus. In fact, I'm having a family gathering this weekend that might provide some interesting context for your article." "Family gathering?" "Let's just say it's time for my personal and professional lives to converge in ways they never have before." After we scheduled the interview for the following weekend, I made my next call to Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the director of the Silver Springs Wellness Center. Elena had been implementing my programs for older adults for the past 5 years with remarkable results that had caught the attention of geriatric specialists nationwide. "Margaret, what a wonderful surprise. How are you managing?" "I'm doing well, Elena. Actually, I'm calling because I have a proposition for you." I'd been considering this idea since my conversation with Vanessa about appropriate exercise programs for seniors. If my family was so concerned about age-appropriate fitness, perhaps it was time to show them what that actually looked like when done properly. I'm thinking about hosting a demonstration event, something that showcases the real potential of fitness programs designed specifically for older adults.
Would you be interested in bringing some of your participants to show what's possible? Elena's enthusiasm was immediate. "Margaret, that would be incredible. Our participants would be thrilled to demonstrate their capabilities. When were you thinking?" "This Saturday. I know it's short notice, but I have some family members who could benefit from seeing what evidence-based senior fitness actually accomplishes." We spent the next hour planning an event that would be both educational and eye-opening. Elena would bring 12 of her most successful program participants, ranging in age from 62 to 89, to demonstrate the advanced techniques I'd developed over the years. These weren't the gentle movements Vanessa mocked each morning. These were sophisticated exercises that had restored mobility, strength, and confidence to thousands of older adults. Friday afternoon, I received a call that would add another layer to the weekend's revelations. Dr. James Morrison from the University Medical Center wanted to discuss the research grant that Chen Wellness Enterprises had been funding for the past 3 years. Mrs. Chen, I wanted to update you on our study results before the conference next month. The data on your exercise protocols is remarkable. Dr. Morrison's research had been following 500 participants over 3 years, comparing traditional senior fitness programs with the methods I'd developed. The results were beyond what anyone had hoped for. We're seeing a 43% reduction in fall-related injuries among participants in your program compared to standard care. Cognitive function scores are up an average of 18%. Most significantly, independence ratings have improved dramatically. Participants are maintaining their ability to live independently an average of 4 years longer than the control group. 4 years longer. I thought about Vanessa's suggestions for chair yoga and water aerobics, programs that focused on limitation rather than possibility. My methods didn't just help people maintain their current abilities, they actually improved function in ways that extended quality of life significantly. Dr. Morrison, would you be available to present these findings to a small group this weekend? I'm hosting an event that could benefit from your expertise. Certainly. What kind of event? An educational demonstration for some family members who have questions about age-appropriate exercise. That evening, I called Linda to confirm the weekend gathering. I could hear the anxiety in her voice as soon as she answered. Mom, about Saturday, are you sure this is necessary? Maybe we could just talk things through as a family without bringing in outsiders. The outsiders, as you call them, are colleagues and friends who understand my work. I thought it would be helpful for everyone to see what I actually do for a living. But David and I have been talking, and we're worried that you're making decisions based on hurt feelings rather than what's best for the family. I paused, considering her words carefully. Linda had always been the peacemaker, the one who tried to smooth over conflicts rather than address their root causes. Linda, what do you think would be best for the family? For things to go back to the way they were, for us to support each other without all this tension and confusion. The way things were involved your sister-in-law mocking my daily exercise routine and calling it embarrassing. The way things were meant all of you sitting silently while she suggested I needed supervision and management. Is that really what you think is best? The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough for me to hear David's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. Mom, we didn't realize how successful your business was. If you had known, you would have treated me with more respect? Linda, do you hear what you're saying? That my worth as a person is tied to my net worth? That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Another pause. I meant that we would have understood why your exercise routine was so important to you. My exercise routine should have been important, regardless of whether it made money. It should have been important because it made me happy, because it kept me healthy, because it was something I chose to do with my own body in my own backyard. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, processing what I'd said. You're right, she said finally. I'm sorry, Mom. We should have defended you. Yes, you should have. And now you're going to learn exactly what you failed to defend. Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear, perfect weather for an outdoor demonstration. I was up at 5, moving through my routine with extra intention, knowing that this might be the last time I performed it in this backyard, in this house that had been my home for 15 years. Elena arrived at 9 with her participants, a group of older adults who moved with confidence and grace that would have shocked anyone who believed in stereotypes about aging. Among them was 89-year-old Robert Kim, who could perform yoga poses that would challenge people half his age,
and 78-year-old Maria Santos, whose balance and coordination had improved so dramatically over the past 2 years that her doctor had stopped worrying about fall risks entirely. Dr. Morrison arrived with his research materials and a presentation that would lay out the scientific foundation for everything my family had dismissed as amateur hour. Marcus Webb came with his recording equipment and a photographer who specialized in capturing the dignity and strength of older adults in motion. At 10 o'clock, my family began arriving. Michael and Vanessa came first, both looking like they were attending a funeral rather than a celebration. Linda and David followed, with Rebecca and James bringing up the rear. They clustered together near the back patio, clearly uncomfortable with the professional setup they found waiting for them. "Mom," said Michael, approaching me with obvious nervousness, "what exactly is happening here?" "Education," I replied simply. "You've all expressed concerns about my exercise routine. I thought it would be helpful for you to see what evidence-based senior fitness actually looks like."
Elena had arranged her participants in formation on the lawn, each one representing a different aspect of the program I'd developed. They weren't wearing matching outfits or performing synchronized movements. They were demonstrating real exercises that had measurably improved their lives. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced to my assembled family, "I'd like you to meet some of the people who have been using the exercise protocols that Vanessa found so embarrassing." I introduced each participant, sharing their stories of transformation. Margaret Williams, 82, had been using a walker 2 years ago and was now hiking 3 miles every weekend. Frank Chen, 75, had regained the core strength to return to his woodworking hobby after a back injury. Sandra Lopez, 67, had improved her balance so significantly that she'd started taking dance classes with her granddaughter. As each person demonstrated the exercises that had changed their lives, I watched my family's expressions shift from confusion to amazement. These weren't the stereotypical senior fitness movements they'd expected. These were sophisticated, challenging exercises that required strength, coordination, and mental focus. Vanessa stood with her mouth slightly open as 89-year-old Robert Kim moved through a sequence that combined elements of yoga, tai chi, and physical therapy. This was a man who, by her logic, should have been confined to chair exercises and water aerobics. Instead, he was demonstrating flexibility and control that surpassed most people half his age. "The movements you see here," Dr. Morrison explained to the group, "are based on 30 years of research and development by Margaret Chen. Her protocols have been tested in clinical trials and have shown unprecedented results in maintaining and improving function in older adults." He clicked through his presentation, showing graphs and statistics that painted a clear picture of the impact my work had on real lives. Reduced hospitalizations, improved cognitive function, extended independence, enhanced quality of life. The numbers were staggering. "Traditional senior fitness programs focus on maintaining current capabilities," Dr. Morrison continued. "Margaret's approach focuses on improvement and growth. The difference in outcomes is remarkable." Linda raised her hand tentatively. "Dr. Morrison, are you saying that Mom developed these exercises herself?" "Mrs. Chen is the pioneer in this field. Her work has revolutionized how we think about aging and physical capability. The exercises she performs each morning are the foundation of a program that's being used in senior centers, rehabilitation facilities, and medical centers across the country." I watched Linda process this information, seeing her glance back and forth between me and the demonstration taking place on our lawn. This was her mother, the woman she'd been willing to see as diminished and in need of guidance, being described as a pioneer and revolutionary. Marcus Webb was documenting everything, interviewing participants about their experiences, and capturing the moment when my family's assumptions collided with reality. This would make an excellent addition to his article about my return to active leadership. "Mrs. Chen," Marcus said, approaching with his recorder, "could you tell us about the personal significance of today's demonstration?" I looked at my family, clustered together like refugees from their own certainty, then back at Marcus. "My family has been concerned that my exercise routine was inappropriate for someone my age. They suggested I join programs more suited to my limitations. Today is about showing them that limitations are often assumptions, and assumptions can be very dangerous things." As the demonstration continued, Elena pulled me aside. "Margaret, I have to ask, your family really didn't know about your work?
They knew I did consulting from home. They assumed it was bookkeeping or administrative work. They never asked for details, and I never volunteered them. But why? You're famous in our field. You've changed thousands of lives. I looked at my family again, watching as they tried to reconcile the mother they thought they knew with the professional recognition they were witnessing. This was her mother, the woman she'd been willing to see as diminished and in need of guidance, being described as a pioneer and revolutionary. Marcus Webb was documenting everything, interviewing participants about their experiences, and capturing the moment when my family's assumptions collided with reality. This would make an excellent addition to his article about my return to active leadership. Mrs. Chen, Marcus said, approaching with his recorder, could you tell us about the personal significance of today's demonstration? I looked at my family, clustered together like refugees from their own certainty, then back at Marcus. My family has been concerned that my exercise routine was inappropriate for someone my age. They suggested I join programs more suited to my limitations. Today is about showing them that limitations are often assumptions, and assumptions can be very dangerous things. As the demonstration continued, Elena pulled me aside. Margaret, I have to ask, your family really didn't know about your work? They knew I did consulting from home. They assumed it was bookkeeping or administrative work. They never asked for details, and I never volunteered them. But why? You're famous in our field. You've changed thousands of lives. I looked at my family again, watching as they tried to reconcile the mother they thought they knew with the professional recognition they were witnessing. Because I wanted them to love me for who I was, not what I'd accomplished. I wanted family relationships that weren't influenced by professional success or financial considerations. And now? Now I realize that hiding my accomplishments didn't protect our relationships. It just made it easier for them to diminish me when it was convenient. The demonstration concluded with a group exercise that brought all the participants together in a synchronized routine that was both beautiful and technically demanding. Watching 12 people over the age of 60 move with such precision and grace, it was impossible to maintain any illusions about the limitations of aging. As the participants gathered their things and began to leave, each one stopped to thank me for the work I'd done to improve their lives. Their gratitude was genuine and specific, referencing improvements in their daily activities, their confidence, their sense of possibility. Vanessa stood frozen as 78-year-old Maria Santos approached her. "You're Margaret's daughter-in-law?" Maria asked, warmly. "Yes," Vanessa replied, her voice barely audible. "You're so lucky to have her in your family. This woman changed my life. 2 years ago, I was afraid to leave my apartment because I might fall. Yesterday, I played tennis with my son for the first time in a decade." After the participants left, my family remained clustered on the patio, looking shock-shelled. Dr. Morrison finished packing his materials and approached the group. "If any of you have questions about Mrs. Chen's work, I'm happy to provide additional information. The research speaks for itself, but I can tell you personally that her contributions to the field of healthy aging are immeasurable." When Dr. Morrison left, Marcus Webb lingered to conduct a few final interviews with family members. I watched from a distance as he asked them about their reactions to the demonstration, their thoughts on my work, their feelings about having witnessed such a clear contradiction to their assumptions. Linda spoke first, her voice shaky with emotion. "I had no idea. I thought Mom was just trying to stay active. I didn't realize she was this accomplished."
David nodded in agreement. "We've been thinking of her as our mother who needed our guidance. We didn't understand that she's an expert in her field." Vanessa remained silent, but I could see her processing the implications of what she'd witnessed. The exercises she'd mocked as pathetic were actually sophisticated interventions that had changed lives. The woman she'd dismissed as embarrassing was actually recognized as a leader in her field. Michael looked directly at Marcus's camera. "I think we owe our mother an apology. We made assumptions about her capabilities based on her age, and we were completely wrong." After Marcus left, the family gathered in the living room for what everyone knew would be a difficult conversation. The atmosphere was heavy with the weight of revealed truths and shattered assumptions. "Mom," Linda began, "we need to talk about what happened here today." "Yes, we do," I agreed.
But first, I want to share some additional information with you. I retrieved the folder of documents Patricia had prepared, the ones that would complete the picture of exactly who they'd been dismissing for the past 6 months. As you've learned, Chen Wellness Enterprises is more successful than you realized. What you don't know yet is the scope of that success. I handed Linda the financial summary Patricia had prepared. Her eyes widened as she read the numbers. Mom, this says the company is worth $34 million, and I own it outright. The silence that followed was profound. Vanessa sank into a chair like her legs had given out. Michael stared at the document like it was written in a foreign language. 34 million, David repeated slowly. The house you've been so comfortable in, the one you were planning to inherit someday, it represents less than 1% of my total assets. Rebecca spoke for the first time all day. Margaret, we had no idea. No, you didn't. And that's partly my fault for not sharing this information with you. But it's also your responsibility for making assumptions about my worth based on superficial observations. I took back the document and set it on the coffee table where everyone could see it. For 6 months, you've been living in my house, eating my food, using my resources, all while treating me like someone who needed my guidance and management. Vanessa called my life's work embarrassing. You all sat silently while she suggested I needed supervision. Vanessa finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know. What didn't you know, Vanessa? That I was successful? That my work had value? Or that I deserved basic respect regardless of my professional achievements? She couldn't answer, and I hadn't expected her to. The question was rhetorical, designed to highlight the fundamental problem with their treatment of me. The truth is, none of you bothered to ask about my work because you assumed it wasn't important. You assumed that because I'm older, because I move differently than you do, because I don't boast about my accomplishments, that I must be less capable than I appear. Rebecca was crying now, quiet tears that spoke to genuine remorse. Mom, we're sorry. We should have been more respectful. Yes, you should have. But sorry isn't enough anymore. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the yard where I demonstrated my worth to a family that should have valued me regardless. I've made some decisions about my future, and they affect all of you. Michael leaned forward. What kind of decisions? First, I'm selling this house. I've already purchased a new property that better suits my current needs and lifestyle. Where? David asked. A penthouse condominium downtown. 3 bedrooms, private gym, and a rooftop garden where I can continue my embarrassing exercise routine without judgment from family members. Vanessa's face went white. But where will Michael and I live? That's something you'll need to figure out on your own. I gave you 6 months to find your own place while Michael looked for work. That was generous, considering how you chose to spend that time. The room erupted in panic as the full implications of my decision became clear. Without my house to live in, Michael and Vanessa would need to find somewhere else to go immediately. With Michael still unemployed and Vanessa working part-time at a boutique, their options were limited. Mom, please, Michael said. We can work this out. We've learned our lesson. Have you? Or are you just panicking because you're realizing the consequences of your behavior? I returned to my chair and looked at each of them in turn. Michael, you've been unemployed for 8 months. Rather than focusing on finding work, you've spent your time supporting your wife's campaign to manage my life. Vanessa, instead of showing gratitude for the home I provided, you've spent 6 months criticizing the woman who is keeping a roof over your head. We didn't realize. You didn't ask.
There's a difference. I pulled out another document from Patricia's folder. This brings me to my second decision. I'm revising my estate planning. The panic in the room was now palpable. I could see them calculating what they stood to lose, finally understanding that their assumptions about inheriting my modest estate were as wrong as everything else they'd believed about me. Currently, my will divides my assets equally among my 3 children. But I've realized that equal distribution doesn't necessarily mean fair distribution. Linda wiped her eyes.
Mom, what are you saying? I'm saying that inheritance should be based on more than just biology. It should reflect values, respect, and the kind of relationship we actually have, not the one I hoped we would have. David found his voice. Are you disinheriting us? I'm reevaluating what each of you has shown me about your character and making decisions accordingly. I let that sink in for a moment before continuing. Linda and David, your behavior this week has been disappointing, but you've shown remorse and a willingness to acknowledge your mistakes. Michael, you've been weak and easily influenced, but you haven't been actively cruel. I turned to Vanessa, who was now visibly shaking. Vanessa, you've shown me exactly who you are. Someone who feels entitled to mock and manage people she perceives as beneath her. Someone who shows no gratitude for generosity and no respect for achievements she doesn't understand. I can change, Vanessa said desperately. I can be better. Can you? Because change requires more than panic at facing consequences. Change requires genuine remorse and a willingness to examine your fundamental assumptions about other people. I stood up again, feeling the weight of decisions that would reshape our family permanently. I'm giving everyone 2 weeks to find new living arrangements. During that time, I want each of you to think carefully about what kind of relationship you want to have with me going forward. And then, Linda asked, and then we'll see who you really are when you're not taking my generosity for granted. As my family filed out of the house, processing the dramatic shift in their circumstances, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. The woman they thought they knew was gone forever, replaced by someone who refused to hide her light for their comfort. The game had changed completely, and they were only beginning to understand the new rules. That evening, as I sat alone in the house that would soon no longer be my home, I received a call from Sarah Martinez. Margaret, I heard about today's demonstration. How did it go? Enlightening, I said, for everyone involved. And your family? How are they handling the revelations? I looked around the living room where we'd had our confrontation, where assumptions had finally collided with reality. They're learning that some lessons are more expensive than others. What's next? I smiled, thinking about the penthouse I'd purchased, about the new chapter of my life that was about to begin. Next, I stop hiding who I am. Next, I build relationships based on truth rather than comfortable illusions. Next, I show them what respect actually looks like when it's earned rather than assumed. As I hung up the phone, I realized that the real exercise of my rights was just beginning. The demonstration had shown them my professional worth, but they still had no idea about the full scope of what they'd taken for granted. The weekend had been educational. The next 2 weeks would be transformational. The 2 weeks I gave my family to process their new reality unfolded like a masterclass in human nature. Each day brought phone calls, text messages, and unexpected visits as they grappled with the complete upheaval of everything they thought they knew about me. What fascinated me most was how differently each person handled the revelation that their assumptions had been catastrophically wrong. Linda called first, just hours after the family meeting ended. Her voice was thick with tears and genuine remorse that I found both heartbreaking and validating. Mom, I can't sleep. I keep thinking about all the times we should have stood up for you, all the moments we let Vanessa treat you like you were incompetent. I was in my study, surrounded by moving boxes and the documents that would finalize my transition to the penthouse downtown. The contrast between my calm, organized preparation and her emotional turmoil wasn't lost on me. Linda, what troubles you most about it? That we were so blind, that we let our own stereotypes about aging cloud our judgment about our own mother, that we were so ready to believe you needed our guidance instead of recognizing that you were still the strong and capable woman who raised us. Her words carried the weight of genuine self-reflection, the kind that suggested she was processing the deeper implications of what had happened rather than just panicking about consequences. I'm glad you're thinking about it seriously, Linda.
This isn't just about money or inheritance. It's about fundamental respect and the assumptions we make about people based on surface appearances. I know. And Mom, I want you to know that even if you decide to cut us out of your will entirely, I understand why. We failed you when you needed us most. That conversation gave me hope that at least one of my children was capable of growth. Linda had always been introspective, but this level of honest self-examination was new for her. David's approach was different. He showed up at my door 3 days later with a bouquet of flowers and a carefully prepared speech that felt more like a business presentation than a family conversation. Mom, Rebecca and I have been talking, and we want you to know that we respect your decision to make changes. We think you're an incredible woman, and we're proud of your success. I invited him in and made coffee while he continued his rehearsed remarks about understanding my position and supporting my choices. It was clear that he and Rebecca had strategized about how to handle the situation, approaching it like a negotiation rather than a family reconciliation.
David, do you think your respect for me should be conditional on my professional success? He paused, clearly not expecting that question. No, of course not. Then why are you telling me you respect me now, after learning about my business? Did you not respect me before? I did respect you before. I just didn't realize how accomplished you were. And that changed your level of respect? I watched him struggle with the logical trap I'd created. Either he'd admitted that his respect was tied to my achievements, or he'd have to acknowledge that his previous level of respect had been inadequate. I think what I'm trying to say is that I understand now why your exercise routine was so important to you. David, my exercise routine should have been important to you because it was important to me, not because it generated revenue or had scientific backing, because it made me happy and healthy and gave me purpose. He left that day looking thoughtful but confused, still trying to process the difference between respecting someone's choices and respecting someone's worth. Michael's response was the most painful to watch. He called repeatedly, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails that revealed how completely unprepared he was for independence. Without my house to live in and without meaningful employment prospects, he was facing a level of personal responsibility he'd been avoiding for months. Mom, Vanessa and I have been looking at apartments, but everything is so expensive. Could you maybe help us with a security deposit, just this once? The request came through text message, as if distance might make it easier to ask for help from the woman his wife had been mocking just weeks earlier. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I used the opportunity to reflect on how my own generosity had contributed to his current helplessness. By providing him with free housing, by cushioning his unemployment with my resources, by enabling his avoidance of difficult choices, I had inadvertently weakened him. The kindest thing I could do now was allow him to develop his own strength. When I finally called him back, my message was clear but compassionate. Michael, I love you deeply, but I won't be providing financial assistance for your housing. This is an opportunity for you to build independence and self-reliance. But Mom, what are we supposed to do? What every other couple in your situation does. Find jobs, create a budget, make difficult choices about what you can afford. Learn to live within your means. The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know about how foreign these concepts were to him. Vanessa's response was the most predictable and the most infuriating. She oscillated between apologies that felt calculated and attempts to minimize her behavior that revealed her fundamental inability to accept responsibility for her actions. Margaret, I think there's been a misunderstanding about what I said. I was just trying to show concern for your safety. This came during an ambush conversation when she cornered me at the grocery store, apparently having stationed herself there, waiting for me to appear. Her approach was aggressive and entitled, as if she deserved an explanation for why her behavior had consequences. Vanessa,
There was no misunderstanding. You called my exercise routine pathetic and embarrassing. You suggested I needed supervision and management. You mocked work that has improved thousands of lives. But I didn't know about your business then. And that makes your behavior acceptable? That because you assumed I was unsuccessful, it was fine to treat me with contempt? She couldn't answer that question because any honest response would have revealed the depth of her character flaws. Instead, she tried a different approach. I was just trying to help. Sometimes family members need to have difficult conversations about safety and appropriate activities. Vanessa, you weren't having a difficult conversation. You were mocking and dismissing me. There's a difference between expressing concern and demonstrating contempt. I walked away from that encounter feeling a mixture of disappointment and clarity. Some people were capable of growth when confronted with their mistakes. Others were only capable of justification and blame shifting. During the same period, my professional life was experiencing a renaissance that provided a stark contrast to the family drama. Marcus Webb's article in Business Weekly had generated significant attention in the corporate wellness industry, leading to interview requests and speaking opportunities that reminded me why I'd chosen to step back into active leadership. Dr. Amanda Foster from the National Institute on Aging called to discuss a potential collaboration on a longitudinal study of my exercise protocols. The preliminary data from Dr. Morrison's research had caught the attention of federal health agencies interested in developing evidence-based recommendations for healthy aging. Mrs. Chen, your work represents a paradigm shift in how we think about physical capability in older adults. We'd like to partner with Chen Wellness Enterprises to develop national guidelines. These conversations felt like returning home after a long journey. In my professional world, I was valued for my expertise, my innovation, my contributions to human welfare. The contrast with my family's treatment couldn't have been more stark. Sarah Martinez and I spent hours planning the company's expansion into new markets, discussing research partnerships and strategic initiatives that would cement our position as the leader in evidence-based fitness for older adults. The work energized me in ways I'd forgotten were possible. Margaret, it's incredible to have you fully engaged again. The team has missed your direct involvement. I've missed it too. I didn't realize how much I disconnected from this part of myself. On Thursday of the second week, I received a call that would add another dimension to the unfolding family drama. Patricia Hendricks had news about the estate planning documents I'd requested. Margaret, I've prepared several different versions of your revised will, depending on how you want to proceed. But before we finalize anything, I need to ask if you're certain about these changes. I was in my new penthouse, standing in the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city where I'd built my empire, while my family assumed I was just keeping busy with hobbies. The view was spectacular, but more importantly, it represented freedom from the need to hide my success for other people's comfort. I'm certain, Patricia, but I want to make the changes gradually based on how each family member responds to this situation.
Gradual changes? I want to reward growth and accountability while ensuring that entitlement and disrespect have consequences. Some of them are showing genuine remorse and self-reflection. Others are just panicking about money. We spent an hour crafting a plan that would allow me to adjust inheritance provisions based on observed behavior over the coming months. It was an approach that prioritized character development over blood relationships, something that felt both revolutionary and entirely appropriate. Friday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor to my new home. Linda arrived with a small potted plant and a letter she'd written by hand. "Mom, I wanted to see your new place and give you this." The penthouse clearly impressed her, though she tried to hide her reaction. The space was elegant and sophisticated, designed for someone who valued quality over quantity and function over display. My exercise area took up an entire wall of windows, equipped with professional-grade equipment that put my embarrassing backyard routine in proper context. "This is beautiful, Mom, and that exercise setup is incredible."
It's functional. I can maintain my routine regardless of weather, and the equipment allows me to demonstrate techniques for clients when needed. Linda handed me the letter with hands that shook slightly. I wrote this because I wanted to make sure I said everything I needed to say. I read her letter while she sat quietly on my new sofa, looking out at the city view that represented my independence. Her words were thoughtful and specific, acknowledging not just her failure to defend me, but her underlying assumptions about aging and capability that had made that failure possible. I realize now that I was seeing you through a lens of diminished expectations, she had written. I assumed that getting older meant getting smaller, less capable, less relevant. I projected my own fears about aging onto you and convinced myself I was being protective when I was actually being patronizing. The letter continued for 3 pages, exploring the cultural messages about aging that had shaped her thinking, the ways she'd unconsciously bought into stereotypes about older women, and her commitment to examining these biases in herself and challenging them in others. Linda, this is exactly the kind of self-reflection I was hoping to see. I've been reading about ageism and the way our society devalues older adults, especially women. I'm horrified by how much of that thinking I'd internalized without even realizing it. We spent 2 hours talking about the broader implications of what had happened, moving beyond the personal hurt to examine the systemic issues that had created the context for our family conflict. Linda's willingness to engage with these deeper questions convinced me that her remorse was genuine and her growth was possible. That evening, I updated Patricia about Linda's progress and authorized the first revision to my estate planning documents. Linda's inheritance would remain intact, with the addition of provisions that would fund her involvement in advocacy work around aging issues. The weekend brought the deadline I'd given the family for finding new living arrangements. Michael and Vanessa had managed to secure a small apartment across town, though from Michael's texts, it was clear they were struggling with the financial reality of supporting themselves without my subsidies. David and Rebecca had used the 2 weeks to research senior living communities, apparently convinced that my move to the penthouse was a precursor to needing assisted care. Their misunderstanding of my situation would have been amusing if it hadn't been so indicative of their continued inability to see me clearly. Sunday evening, I hosted a small gathering in my new home to mark the transition. I'd invited Elena Rodriguez and several participants from the demonstration, along with Dr. Morrison and Marcus Webb. It was a celebration of the professional relationships that had sustained me through the family crisis, and a reminder of the community I'd built around shared values and mutual respect. As my guests admired the penthouse and shared stories about the impact of my work on their lives, I felt a profound sense of coming home to myself. This was who I was when I wasn't hiding my light under a bushel for other people's comfort. Dr. Morrison raised his glass in a toast to Margaret Chen, whose courage to challenge assumptions about aging has changed countless lives. As we celebrated, my phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Margaret, Michael and I are settled in our new place. I wanted you to know that I've been thinking about our conversation, and I realize I was wrong about some things. Could we talk sometime? I showed the message to Elena, who'd become a trusted friend over the years of our professional collaboration. What do you think? Elena asked. Genuine remorse or damage control? Time will tell, but I'm not making any decisions based on words anymore. I'm looking for sustained behavioral change. The next morning, I began a new routine in my new home. I performed my exercises in front of the wall of windows, visible to anyone who cared to look, no longer hiding my capabilities or my methods. The morning sun streamed across the professional equipment that represented decades of research and development, illuminating a space designed for strength rather than concealment. As I moved through the sequences that had built my empire and changed thousands of lives, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. The family crisis had been painful, but it had also been clarifying. I was no longer willing to diminish myself for other people's comfort or hide my achievements to maintain false harmony. The phone rang as I finished my routine. It was Sarah Martinez with news that would add another layer to my family's education about who I really was. Margaret, I just got off the phone with the Secretary of Health and Human Services. They want to invite you to serve on a national commission on healthy aging.
It's a 5-year appointment, and you'd be helping to shape federal policy on fitness and wellness for older adults. A presidential appointment, recognition at the highest levels of government for work my family had dismissed as embarrassing hobby activities. Sarah, I'm honored, and yes, I accept. There will be a formal announcement next week along with a White House ceremony for all the new appointees. After I hung up, I stood in my exercise area looking out at the city I'd conquered while remaining invisible to my own family. Soon, that invisibility would be impossible to maintain. The national appointment would generate media attention that would make my professional prominence undeniable. My family thought they learned the truth about who I was. They had no idea how much more there was to discover. That afternoon, I called Linda to share the news about the federal appointment. Her reaction was immediate and emotional. "Mom, that's incredible. A presidential appointment? I'm so proud of you. Thank you, sweetheart. I wanted you to know before it becomes public next week."
Does everyone else know? You're the first family member I've told. The significance of that wasn't lost on either of us. By calling Linda first, I was signaling that her efforts at growth and self-reflection had been noticed and valued. David's reaction, when I called him an hour later, was more complex. "A federal commission? Mom, this is huge. Why didn't you ever tell us you were being considered for something like this?" "David, until very recently, you all thought my exercise routine was an embarrassing hobby. How do you think you would have reacted if I'd mentioned that the federal government was interested in my work?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. David was smart enough to understand the implication. Michael's response was predictably focused on the immediate implications for his own situation. "Mom, with this appointment, will you be traveling a lot? Will you need help managing your properties?" Even in the face of evidence that his mother was operating at the highest levels of professional achievement, his first thought was about how it might benefit him. The selfishness was breathtaking in its consistency. I decided not to tell Vanessa about the appointment directly. If she learned about it through media coverage or family conversations, her reaction would be more revealing than anything she might say in a prepared response to my direct communication. The White House ceremony took place the following Thursday, a formal event that celebrated the new appointees to various federal commissions and advisory boards. I wore a navy blue suit and my grandmother's pearls, the same combination I'd chosen for confronting my family's assumptions weeks earlier. The event was covered by national media, with particular attention paid to the Healthy Aging Commission and its mandate to address the challenges of an aging population. As the lead appointee and chair of the commission, I was interviewed by several reporters about my vision for the work ahead. "Mrs. Chen, your appointment represents a significant recognition of your contributions to the field of healthy aging. What message do you hope this sends to older adults across the country?" Standing on the steps of the White House, representing not just my own work, but the potential of every older adult who'd been dismissed or underestimated, I felt the weight of the moment. I hope it sends the message that aging doesn't mean diminishing, that older adults have tremendous capacity for growth, contribution, and leadership, that assumptions about limitation based on age are not just wrong, but harmful to our entire society. The interview aired on the evening news, and by Friday morning, my phone was buzzing with reactions from family members who'd seen their mother and grandmother speaking as a recognized expert on national television. Linda texted first. "Mom, watching you on the news made me cry with pride. You looked so confident and authoritative. I can't believe we ever thought we needed to manage your life." David called within an hour. "Mom, I saw the interview. You were incredible. I'm starting to understand just how wrong we were about everything." Michael's message was longer and more emotional than his usual communications. "Mom, seeing you on TV made me realize how little I actually know about who you are. I've been thinking of you as my mother who needed my protection, but you're obviously a leader who doesn't need protection from anyone. I'm sorry for being so blind." Vanessa's response came last and was the most telling. Rather than acknowledging what she'd seen or expressing remorse for her previous behavior, she sent a message that focused entirely on social positioning. "Saw you on the news. Very impressive. We should get together soon so I can hear more about your work."
The difference in responses was illuminating. Some family members were processing the deeper implications of what they'd witnessed, examining their own assumptions and acknowledging their mistakes. Others were simply recalibrating their approach to someone they now recognized as powerful. That weekend, I made final decisions about the estate planning revisions I'd been considering. Linda's inheritance remained not just intact, but enhanced with additional provisions for funding her advocacy work. David's inheritance was reduced, but not eliminated, reflecting his slower but genuine progress toward understanding. Michael's inheritance was placed in a trust that would provide support tied to his efforts at personal growth and independence. Vanessa was removed from consideration entirely, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity about her character and values. The most significant change was the creation of a foundation that would ensure my life's work continued beyond my lifetime. The Margaret Chen Foundation for Healthy Aging would fund research, advocacy, and programs designed to challenge ageism and promote the potential of older adults. As I signed the documents that would reshape my family's future, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this point. The exercise routine that had triggered such contempt had become the foundation for national recognition. The assumptions about my limitations had been shattered by evidence of my capabilities. The family dynamics based on false premises had been replaced by relationships grounded in truth. Not all of those relationships had survived the transition. Some family members had proven capable of growth and change. Others had revealed character flaws that made authentic connection impossible. But for the first time in years, I was living as my complete self, no longer hiding my achievements or diminishing my capabilities for other people's comfort. The woman who performed embarrassing exercises in her backyard was the same woman advising the federal government on healthy aging policy. The integration felt like us reviewing policy proposals when Patricia called with urgent news about Vanessa that would test everything I'd learned about forgiveness and accountability. "Margaret, there's been an incident involving your daughter-in-law. She's been arrested for insurance fraud." I set down my reading glasses and processed this information. Since being cut from my estate planning, Vanessa had largely disappeared from family communications, though Michael occasionally mentioned that their marriage was struggling under financial pressure. What kind of insurance fraud? She filed false claims about injuries from a car accident that apparently never happened. The insurance company investigated when medical records didn't match her claims. It looks like she's facing serious charges. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who had mocked my gentle exercise routine as inadequate had been caught faking injuries for money. The contrast between building something meaningful and taking shortcuts for quick gain couldn't have been starker. Is Michael involved? No evidence suggests he knew anything about it. In fact, he's the one who contacted me. He's asking if you might consider helping with legal fees.
I walked to my office window, looking out at the city where I'd built my reputation through decades of honest work. The request for help came from someone who had stood silently while his wife attacked my character and dismissed my achievements. What did you tell him? That I'd relay the message but make no recommendations either way. That evening, Michael called me directly for the first time since moving out. His voice carried a weariness I'd never heard before. The sound of someone finally confronting reality, without buffers or excuses. "Mom, I know I have no right to ask this, especially after everything that's happened. But Vanessa is looking at serious jail time, and I don't know what else to do." "Michael, tell me what you're thinking about this situation." There was a long pause. "Honestly, I'm thinking that this might be who she really is. That maybe all the signs were there and I just didn't want to see them." His willingness to examine his wife's character, rather than simply seeking rescue, suggested a level of growth I hadn't expected from him. "What signs?" "The way she treated you was just the beginning. Since we've been on our own, I've seen how she reacts when things don't go her way. The entitlement, the anger, the willingness to blame everyone else for our problems. And how does that make you feel? Like I married someone I didn't really know. Or maybe I knew and convinced myself it didn't matter because she was beautiful and made me feel important." This conversation was different from our previous interactions.
Michael was being honest about his own mistakes and motivations rather than simply seeking solutions to immediate problems. Michael, I won't be providing money for Vanessa's legal defense, but I want you to know that my decision isn't about punishment. It's about allowing natural consequences to occur. I understand. Actually, I think I'm relieved. For months, I've been hoping you'd fix this somehow, but that's exactly the kind of thinking that got me into this mess. 2 weeks later, David called with news that represented a different kind of family development. Mom, Rebecca and I have been talking, and we want to do something to make amends for how we treated you. What kind of something? We've been volunteering at the senior center, helping with their exercise programs. We're using information from your research to help design better activities for the participants. This was unexpected. Rather than offering empty apologies or seeking financial help, David was taking concrete action that aligned with my values and addressed the issues that had caused our conflict. How did that come about? Honestly, after seeing your demonstration and learning about your work, we realized how much we didn't understand about aging and fitness. We wanted to educate ourselves and do something useful at the same time. And what have you learned? That most of what we believed about aging was wrong. That the people in these programs are capable of so much more than anyone expects. That the real barriers aren't physical limitations, but social assumptions about what older adults can and should do. David's volunteer work continued for months, evolving into a formal partnership with my foundation to develop community-based fitness programs. His transformation from someone who had patronized me to someone who advocated for older adults felt genuine and sustainable. Linda's growth followed a different trajectory, but was equally meaningful. She had enrolled in graduate courses on gerontology and advocacy, using her inheritance enhancement to fund research into ageism in healthcare settings. Mom, I'm working on a project about how medical professionals make assumptions about older patients' capabilities. The parallels to what we did to you are striking and depressing. Her academic work was generating attention in policy circles, with several of her papers being cited in discussions about healthcare reform. She had transformed her personal growth into professional contribution in ways that honored both her remorse and her capabilities. Linda, I'm proud of the work you're doing. You're turning a painful family experience into something that could help thousands of people. I had to. I couldn't live with myself knowing that I'd participated in the kind of thinking that harms so many older adults every day. The most surprising development came from an unexpected source. Elena Rodriguez called me with news about a new volunteer at the Silver Springs Wellness Center. Margaret, you're not going to believe who showed up asking to help with our programs. Who? Michael, your son. He said he wanted to understand what his mother actually does for a living. Michael had enrolled in a volunteer training program without telling me, learning to assist with the exercise classes I'd designed. According to Elena, he was dedicated, respectful to the participants, and genuinely interested in understanding the science behind the programs. How is he doing? Really well. The participants love him, and he's showing real aptitude for the work. More importantly, he seems to understand that this isn't about helping helpless people. It's about supporting capable people and reaching their potential. This represented a fundamental shift in Michael's thinking. Instead of seeing older adults as needing management and protection, he was learning to see them as individuals with agency and potential. When I visited the center to observe his work, I found a man I barely recognized. The Michael I watched leading a balance improvement class was confident, respectful, and focused on empowerment rather than limitation. Mrs. Chen, one of the participants told me after class, your son is wonderful. He treats us like we're athletes in training, not patients in recovery. After the session, Michael and I walked through the center's garden, past the outdoor exercise stations where participants were working through routines I'd developed decades earlier. Mom, I owe you an apology that goes beyond anything I said before. What do you mean? I've been working here for 3 months, and every day I see the impact of your work on real people's lives. Mrs. Patterson is walking without her cane for the first time in 5 years.
Rodriguez has regained enough strength to play with his grandchildren.
These aren't small improvements, they're life-changing transformations. He stopped walking and faced me directly. All these years, I thought you were just my mom, who did some consulting work from home. I had no idea you were changing people's lives on this scale. And worse, when Vanessa attacked the very thing that makes this possible, I let her do it. Michael, what matters now is that you understand. The question is what you want to do with that understanding. I want to keep doing this work. I've applied to go back to school for a degree in exercise science. I want to help expand your programs to reach more people. This was the transformation I'd hoped for, but hadn't dared expect. Michael was choosing to build something meaningful rather than simply seeking comfort or rescue. As we continued walking, he shared his thoughts about his marriage and his future. I've filed for divorce, Mom. Vanessa and I want different things from life, and I can't keep pretending that doesn't matter. The divorce proceedings revealed just how different their values had become. While Vanessa focused on minimizing her legal consequences and finding someone to blame for her situation, Michael concentrated on building a new life based on purpose rather than comfort. The culmination of these family changes came during the first annual Margaret Chen Foundation Gala, an event designed to raise awareness and funding for healthy aging initiatives. Linda spoke about her research into healthcare ageism. David presented the community program he'd helped develop. Michael shared stories from his volunteer work that brought several audience members to tears. Watching my children on stage advocating for the same values they'd once dismissed, I felt a profound sense of completion. The family conflict that had begun with mockery of my exercise routine had evolved into a platform for advancing exactly the kind of thinking I'd spent my career promoting. The evening's keynote address was delivered by Dr. Morrison, who shared the latest research findings from our ongoing studies. The data was remarkable, showing sustained improvements in physical function, cognitive health, and quality of life among program participants across multiple demographics. Margaret Chen's work represents more than just an advance in exercise science, Dr. Morrison told the audience. It represents a fundamental shift in how we think about human potential across the lifespan. As the event concluded and guests mingled over cocktails, I was approached by a woman I didn't recognize, someone in her 40s with the bearing of a health professional. Mrs. Chen, I'm Dr. Sarah Kim. I work in geriatric medicine at University Hospital. How can I help you, Dr. Kim? I wanted to thank you personally. My department has implemented your protocols in our rehabilitation programs, and we're seeing remarkable outcomes. But more than that, your work has changed how I think about my older patients. In what way? I used to focus on helping them adapt to limitations. Now I focus on helping them exceed expectations. The difference in outcomes is dramatic, but the difference in dignity is immeasurable. These conversations continued throughout the evening, with healthcare professionals, researchers, and advocates sharing stories about how my work had influenced their approach to aging and capability. The personal vindication was satisfying, but the broader impact was profound. Later that night, as I sat in my penthouse reviewing the evening's success, I received a text message that provided an unexpected coda to the family drama that had started everything. It was from Vanessa. Saw news coverage of your gala. Impressive event. I am in a treatment program now and doing a lot of thinking about my choices. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I understand now what I failed to see before. I stared at the message for a long time, considering how to respond. The woman who had mocked my life's work was now acknowledging its value, but from the position of someone facing the consequences of her own poor choices. I decided not to respond immediately. Some apologies needed to marinate in time and sustained behavioral change before they could be properly evaluated. The next morning, I began my exercise routine in front of the wall of windows that had become my favorite feature of the penthouse. As I moved through the sequences that had started this entire journey, I reflected on how much had changed since the day Vanessa had called them embarrassing. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda. Mom, watching you speak last night reminded me why I'm so proud to be your daughter. Thank you for teaching us that it's never too late to grow. Another message came from David. The community program has a waiting list now. Demand is exceeding our capacity. Good problem to have. Michael's text was the most meaningful.
Leading the morning class today, every participant will start with the same gentle movements you do each morning. Amazing how something that looks so simple can be so powerful. As I finished my routine and prepared for another day of commission work, I realized that the exercise of my rights had accomplished something beyond personal vindication. It had created a framework for authentic relationships based on respect rather than assumption, on understanding rather than stereotype. The family members who had been willing to examine their own biases and grow beyond their comfortable prejudices had found their way back into my life on new terms. Those who had been unable or unwilling to change had found their own paths to consequences and, hopefully, eventual growth. Most importantly, the conflict that had begun with contempt for my capabilities had become a catalyst for advancing exactly the kind of social change I dedicated my career to promoting. The embarrassing exercise routine that had triggered such scorn was now being recognized at the highest levels of government and implemented in healthcare facilities across the country. The assumptions about aging and limitation that had underlined my family's behavior were being challenged by research, advocacy, and policy change. Standing in my exercise area, looking out at the city where I'd built my empire while remaining invisible to those closest to me, I felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond personal vindication. The true exercise of my rights had been about much more than inheritance or estate planning. It had been about claiming space for truth, capability, and authentic relation. The woman who had been dismissed as embarrassing was now shaping national policy on healthy aging. The gentle movements that had been mocked as pathetic were improving lives across the country. The assumptions that seemed so reasonable to my family had been revealed as dangerous prejudices that limited human potential. As I prepared to leave for another day of commission meetings, I smiled at the irony of how it all had unfolded. My family had wanted me to exercise more appropriately for my age. Instead, I had exercised my right to be seen clearly, to be valued accurately, and to build relationships based on truth rather than comfortable illusions. The real transformation wasn't in my circumstances, which had always been strong, but in my willingness to live transparently as the complete person I'd always been.
That, more than any inheritance revision or professional recognition, was the most valuable exercise of all. 2 years later, I was standing in the Rose Garden of the White House, preparing to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom for my contributions to healthy aging policy and advocacy. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn as I performed my daily exercise routine in the hotel suite where I'd stayed the night before. The same gentle movements that had once been called embarrassing were now part of a morning ritual that preceded one of the highest honors our nation could bestow. The medal ceremony would be attended by my children, who had each carved out meaningful roles in the movement I'd helped create. Linda's research had influenced Medicare policy regarding preventative care for older adults. David's community programs had been replicated in 47 states. Michael had completed his degree and was now directing the Foundation's volunteer training initiatives. As I prepared for the ceremony, my phone rang with a call from an unexpected source. It was Vanessa, now 18 months out of prison and working as a counselor in a program that helped older adults navigate financial challenges. "Margaret, I know this might not be the best time, but I saw the news about your medal and I wanted to say something." I had maintained minimal contact with Vanessa since her release, monitoring her progress through Michael, but keeping appropriate distance. Her transformation appeared genuine, but I had learned to distinguish between crisis-induced change and authentic growth. "What's on your mind, Vanessa?" "I've been working with older adults every day for the past year, and I see the impact of the kind of thinking I used to have. When I dismissed your exercise routine, I wasn't just being cruel to you, I was perpetuating the kind of ageism that makes my clients' lives harder every single day." Her voice carried a weight of understanding that hadn't been present in our previous conversations. The woman who had once mocked my capabilities was now confronting the broader implications of that mindset. "Tell me more about what you're seeing." "My clients come to me feeling invisible, like society has written them off as irrelevant. They've internalized messages about limitation and decline that prevent them from even trying to improve their situations. The work you do isn't just about exercise. It's about challenging a whole system of beliefs that diminishes human potential. This level of insight suggested that Vanessa's transformation went beyond simply avoiding future legal troubles. She was grappling with the philosophical and social implications of her previous behavior. Vanessa, what you're describing is exactly why this work matters so much. When we change assumptions about aging, we change possibilities for millions of people. I know that now, and I wanted you to know that I'm not just sorry for how I treated you. I'm committed to spending the rest of my career fighting the kind of thinking I used to represent. After the call ended, I reflected on the complex nature of forgiveness and redemption. Vanessa's journey from contempt to advocacy represented the kind of fundamental transformation that was possible when people were willing to examine their deepest assumptions about human worth and capability. The Medal of Freedom ceremony was held on a perfect October afternoon, with the autumn leaves providing a backdrop that seemed symbolic of the beauty possible in later seasons of life. As President Martinez presented the medal, she spoke about the broader significance of my work. Dr. Chen's contributions extend far beyond the realm of fitness and exercise. She has challenged our nation to reconsider fundamental assumptions about aging, capability, and human potential. Her work has improved the lives of millions of older adults and changed how we think about the aging process itself. The medal was beautiful, but more meaningful was the presence of 12 participants from my original programs, now ranging in age from 75 to 94, who had been invited to witness the ceremony. These were people whose lives had been transformed by the principles I developed, living proof that the assumptions my family had made about aging were not just wrong, but harmful. After the ceremony, I was approached by a young reporter from the Washington Post who wanted to understand the personal story behind my professional achievements. Dr. Chen, your work has clearly had tremendous impact on national policy and individual lives, but I understand this began as something much more personal. I thought about how to answer her question truthfully without sensationalizing the family conflict that had catalyzed my return to public prominence. My work has always been personal. When we develop assumptions about what people can and cannot do based on their age, we're not just creating policy problems. We're creating family problems, relationship problems, and individual problems. The personal and the political are never really separate. Can you tell me more about what you mean? I mean that ageism isn't just an abstract social issue. It plays out in families when adult children assume their parents need management rather than support. It plays out in healthcare when providers focus on limitation rather than potential. It plays out in workplaces when experience is devalued in favor of youth. The interview continued for an hour, exploring the connections between my research, my advocacy, and my personal experiences with family dynamics around aging. The resulting article would be published the following week with the headline, "The Personal Revolution Behind a National Movement." That evening, I hosted a dinner for my family and closest colleagues at a restaurant overlooking the Potomac River. The conversation flowed naturally between personal updates and professional developments, reflecting the integration of different aspects of my life that had once been carefully separated. Linda shared news about her latest research project, which was examining how ageism in healthcare settings affected treatment outcomes for older patients. Her work was generating attention from medical schools interested in incorporating anti-ageism training into their curricula. Mom, I keep finding examples of the same thinking that we'd demonstrated in our family. Medical professionals making assumptions about cognitive capacity, physical limitations, and quality of life preferences without actually assessing individual patients. David described the expansion of his community programs into rural areas, where access to fitness resources for older adults had been particularly limited. The mobile programs he developed were now serving communities across the Midwest, bringing evidence-based exercise opportunities to people who had never had access to them before. The response has been incredible. We're seeing participants in their 80s and 90s making improvements they never thought possible. The problem was never capability. The problem was opportunity and expectation.
Michael's update focused on the volunteer training program, which had grown from a local initiative to a national certification system. Volunteers were being trained not just in exercise techniques, but in recognizing and challenging ageist assumptions in their interactions with older adults. We're teaching people that helping doesn't mean taking over, that support doesn't mean assuming incompetence, that respect doesn't depend on productivity or youth. As we talked, I realized that the family conflict that had seemed so painful 2 years ago had become the foundation for work that was touching thousands of lives. The assumption challenging that had begun in my backyard was now happening in community centers, hospitals, and policy discussions across the country. Dr. Martinez, who had joined us for dinner, raised her glass in a toast. To Margaret, whose courage to demand respect created a movement that's changing how our entire society thinks about aging. The next morning, I received an email that would open another chapter in the ongoing story. Dr. Amanda Foster from the National Institute on Aging was writing to invite me to lead a new international initiative on healthy aging policy. Margaret, based on the success of your work in the United States, the World Health Organization has asked us to recommend someone to head their new global initiative on age-friendly societies.
Your name was unanimous choice among the committee members. A global initiative, the opportunity to take the principles I'd developed in response to family conflict and apply them to policy challenges affecting older adults worldwide. The scope was both thrilling and humbling. I called Sarah Martinez to discuss the implications of such a commitment. Leading a global initiative would require extensive travel, coordination with international partners, and navigation of complex cultural differences around aging and respect. Margaret, this is the logical next step for your work. You've proven the effectiveness of your approach at the individual, community, and national levels. Global application could impact millions of lives. Sarah, I'm 70 years old. Am I being realistic about taking on something this demanding? Are you seriously asking me that question? You're the woman who just received the Presidential Medal of Freedom for proving that age doesn't limit capability. You're the expert on challenging assumptions about what older adults can accomplish. Her point was well taken. If I couldn't model confidence in the capabilities of a 70-year-old woman, how could I effectively advocate for changing global attitudes about aging? I accepted the position with the understanding that I would structure the work to maximize impact while maintaining the exercise routine and personal practices that had sustained me through previous challenges. The announcement of my appointment generated media attention that brought unexpected closure to some unfinished aspects of the family story. I received a letter from Vanessa that provided insight into her continued transformation. Margaret, seeing news about your global appointment made me think about the ripple effects of our choices. When I mocked your exercise routine, I was revealing beliefs about aging that I'd never examined. Now I work every day with people whose lives have been limited by those same beliefs. I wanted you to know that your example of refusing to accept those limitations has become part of how I approach my work. The letter continued for several pages, detailing her experiences working with older adults and her growing understanding of how ageism operated at both personal and systemic levels. Her transformation from someone who embodied ageist thinking to someone who fought against it represented the kind of change that was possible when people were willing to confront their own biases. I decided to respond to her letter, something I hadn't done with her previous communications. Her growth appeared genuine and sustained, and her work was contributing to the broader movement I'd helped create. Vanessa, your letter shows the kind of self-reflection and commitment to change that makes real transformation possible. The fact that you're now working to counter the very attitudes you once represented gives me hope for broader social change. I also included information about volunteer opportunities with the Global Initiative, recognizing that her experience with both perpetuating and fighting ageism could be valuable in developing international programs. As I prepared for my first international conference as head of the Global Initiative, I spent time reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. The family conflict that had begun with contempt for my morning exercise routine had evolved into a platform for challenging ageism on a global scale. The assumption shattering that had started in my own living room was now happening in policy discussions with world leaders.
The respect I'd had to demand from my own family was now being systematized into international standards for age-friendly societies. The evening before my departure for Geneva, I performed my exercise routine one final time in the penthouse that had represented my declaration of independence from others' limitations. Tomorrow, I would begin performing the same routine in hotel rooms around the world, carrying the message that capability doesn't diminish with age. As I moved through the familiar sequences, I thought about all the people whose lives had been touched by the principles I'd developed in response to being dismissed and underestimated. The gentle movements that had once been called embarrassing were now part of programs operating on 6 continents. The phone rang as I finished my routine. It was Linda, calling to wish me well on the new adventure. "Mom, I keep thinking about how this all started with Vanessa making fun of your exercises. Did you ever imagine it would lead to this?" Honestly, no. I thought I was just defending my right to move my body the way I chose in my own backyard. I had no idea it would become a platform for challenging global attitudes about aging. "What do you think Dad would say if he could see where this has led?" I considered her question carefully. Robert had supported my work, but had preferred to keep it separate from our family life. He might have been amazed by the public prominence, but proud of the principles being advanced. I think he'd be proud that we turned a painful family experience into something that's helping people around the world. He always believed that personal challenges could become opportunities for growth if we approach them with the right attitude. Do you ever regret how things unfolded? The family conflict, the estate changes, all of it? Linda, I regret that it was necessary. I regret that respect had to be demanded rather than freely given, but I don't regret the outcomes. The work we're doing now, the lives we're touching, the attitudes we're changing, none of that would have happened if I'd continued hiding my capabilities to make others comfortable. After the call ended, I packed the last items for my trip to Geneva, including the purple yoga mat I'd used for the past 15 years. The same mat that had witnessed family conflict would now be present at international policy discussions. As I prepared for sleep, I received one final message that perfectly captured the transformation of the past 2 years. It was from Michael, who was now leading a session for new volunteers. "Mom, I just finished training a group of people who want to help with our programs. One of them asked why we start every session by talking about challenging assumptions. I told them about a woman who was called embarrassing for exercising in her backyard and how she turned that disrespect into a movement that's changing the world. They were amazed. So am I, every day." The next morning, as my plane lifted off for Geneva, I looked down at the city where I'd built my career, raised my family, and learned to demand the respect I deserved. The journey ahead would be challenging, but it was built on a foundation of truth, capability, and authentic relationships that had been forged through the exercise of rights I'd almost been afraid to claim. The embarrassing exercise routine that had started everything would continue in hotel rooms and conference centers around the world. But now it carried with it the weight of evidence, the power of advocacy, and the hope of millions of older adults who deserve to be seen for their potential rather than their limitations. The transformation was complete, but the work was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.